The air crackled with a deceptive kind of cheer, Christmas lights blinking like mocking eyes as my mother slammed the door. The sound echoed, a finality that stole the breath from my lungs. I stood there, my son clinging to my leg, the weight of his small body the only thing anchoring me to reality. It wasn't just a door closing, it was a lifetime of trust and family shattered on the frozen ground. The sting of tears mixed with the biting wind as I fumbled for my car keys, the engine roaring to life like a wounded beast as I pulled away from what I thought was my home. If you've ever felt abandoned by family, subscribe now to hear how Amelia fought back. Christmas Eve, the very words tasted like ash in my mouth. It was supposed to be a time for joy, for togetherness, a sanctuary of warmth against the winter's chill. Instead, it had become the backdrop for my personal exile, a cruel joke orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to cherish me. My son, Leo, bless his heart, didn't fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the tremor in my voice. "Mommy, are we still going to see Santa?" he asked, his voice small and filled with a fragile hope that threatened to shatter me completely. "Of course, sweetheart," I managed to choke out, forcing a smile that felt like a grotesque mask. "Santa knows where we are." But did he? Did anyone, really? I had always been the dependable one, the rock of the family. I was Amelia, the problem solver, the peacekeeper, the one who could always be counted on to smooth things over, to make everything all right. And what had it gotten me? A locked door on the coldest night of the year. The phone rang, jolting me back to the present. It was my grandmother, her voice sharp and brittle, like ice cracking underfoot. "Amelia," she said, her tone devoid of any warmth. "You think that house is your mother's? You are wrong." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. What was she talking about? The house had been in our family for generations, passed down through a tangled web of inheritance and promises. My mother had always acted like it was hers, ruling the roost with an iron fist, but I had never questioned it. Now my grandmother's chilling words suggested a deeper, darker truth, a betrayal that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. "What do you mean, Grandma?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The deed," she hissed. "It's not in her name. Never was." The line went dead, leaving me reeling in the deafening silence. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the car swerving slightly as the implications of her words crashed over me. I wasn't just homeless. I was a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing.
Turning the car around wasn't a decision, it was a primal instinct. It wasn't about begging for a bed, it was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, about confronting the darkness that had been festering beneath the surface of my family for far too long. As I drove back, I pictured them inside, gathered around the Christmas tree, laughing and celebrating, while my son and I were cast out into the cold. The image fueled a cold, burning rage within me, a determination to expose their lies and take back what they had stolen. The closer I got, the clearer my purpose became. This wasn't just about a house. It was about justice, about breaking free from the shackles of their control, about finally standing up for myself and my son. I was no longer the meek, compliant Amelia they had always known. A storm was coming, and they were about to feel its full force. The person I trusted most was one of them. I'd always believed my grandmother to be a neutral party, a wise elder who held the family together. Turns out, she was the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The tires crunched on the gravel driveway as I parked, the headlights cutting through the festive decorations like accusing fingers. Leo was asleep in the back, his small face peaceful, oblivious to the storm brewing around us. I hated to wake him, but I couldn't leave him in the car. Gathering him into my arms, I felt the familiar surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to shield him from the ugliness of the world. As I approached the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and carols, the clinking of glasses, a sickening parody of holiday cheer. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, to plaster on a facade of normalcy, but my hands were shaking too badly. The door swung open before I could knock, revealing my mother, her face flushed with wine, her eyes widening in surprise, and then hardening with disapproval. "Amelia," she said, her voice dripping with disdain,
What do you want? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations and resentment. I swallowed my pride, pushing past her into the brightly lit hallway. We need to talk, Mom, I said, my voice trembling slightly. This isn't the time, she snapped, trying to block my path. It's Christmas Eve. Can't you just leave us alone? No, I said, my voice gaining strength. I can't. Not anymore. The scene devolved quickly. Accusations flew like poison darts. My mother, fueled by years of resentment and entitlement, painted me as ungrateful, selfish, a constant disappointment. I tried to reason with her, to explain the pain and confusion I was feeling, but my words were lost in the storm of her anger. My grandmother watched from the living room, her face an impassive mask, her eyes glinting with a cold, calculating light. It was then that I realized the full extent of their deception, the depth of their conspiracy.
They had planned this, orchestrated my downfall with meticulous precision, and I had been too blind, too trusting to see it coming. Finally, defeated and humiliated, I turned to leave, Leo still heavy in my arms. As I reached the door, my mother delivered one last, crushing blow. "Don't ever come back here, Amelia," she said, her voice laced with venom. "You're no longer welcome in this family." The next few weeks were a blur of desperation and uncertainty. I bounced between cheap motels and the cramped spare rooms of sympathetic friends, each day a struggle to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Leo. The shame and humiliation were relentless, a constant weight on my chest. Sleepless nights were spent replaying the events of that fateful Christmas Eve, searching for answers, for clues, for any indication that I had somehow deserved this treatment. But there was nothing, only the cold, hard reality of their betrayal. The money was running out fast. My savings, meager to begin with, were dwindling with each passing day. I applied for countless jobs, but the holiday season was a slow time for hiring, and my lack of a permanent address didn't help. The weight of responsibility for my son was crushing, the fear of failure a constant companion. I tried to reach out to other family members, hoping for some support, some understanding, but they all echoed my mother's sentiments, their voices cold and distant. I was alone, cast adrift in a sea of indifference. Driven to the brink, I swallowed my pride and sought legal advice. The lawyer, a weary-looking woman with kind eyes, listened patiently to my story, her expression growing increasingly grim as I recounted the details of my family's deception. When I finished, she sighed and shook her head. "The situation is complicated, Amelia," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "If the house isn't legally in your mother's name, you may have a claim, but proving it will be difficult and expensive." She explained the intricacies of inheritance law, the tangled web of deeds and trusts that would need to be unraveled. The cost of litigation would be astronomical, far beyond my reach. "I'm sorry," she said, "but without significant financial resources, there's not much I can do." Her words were a crushing blow, extinguishing the last flicker of hope. I left her office feeling more defeated than ever, the weight of my powerlessness almost unbearable. As I walked down the street, the city lights blurring through my tears, I felt a surge of anger, a white-hot rage that threatened to consume me. They had taken everything from me, stripped me bare, and left me to rot. But they wouldn't win. I refused to be a victim. I would fight back, not with lawyers or money, but with something far more potent: the truth. I would expose their lies, reveal their treachery to the world. The plan started to form in my mind, a slow, deliberate process of gathering evidence, connecting the dots, uncovering the secrets they had so carefully guarded for so long. It would be a long and arduous journey, fraught with risk and danger, but I was prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim my life, to protect my son, to exact my revenge. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. The deed, it's not in her name, never was. That tiny breadcrumb was the key. It was time to start digging. I spent every waking hour poring over old documents, searching for any clue that would corroborate my grandmother's claim.
I haunted the local library, sifting through dusty archives and historical records. The task was daunting, the information fragmented and incomplete, but I refused to be discouraged. I knew that somewhere, buried beneath layers of deceit and obfuscation, the truth was waiting to be unearthed. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together the puzzle, each new discovery fueling my determination. I found old property records that showed the house had originally belonged to my great-grandfather, passed down through the family through a series of complex trusts and legal arrangements. I discovered inconsistencies in the paperwork, discrepancies that suggested something was amiss. And then, one day, I found it, a hidden clause in the original trust agreement, a provision that stipulated the house would revert to the direct descendants of my great-grandfather if certain conditions were not met. Those conditions, I realized with a growing sense of excitement, had never been fulfilled. My mother had been living in the house illegally for years, her claim to ownership based on nothing but lies and manipulation. I had the ammunition I needed. The weight of that discovery was almost unbearable. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about a lifetime of lies, a foundation of deceit upon which my entire family had been built. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The walls of the motel room seemed to be closing in, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, distorted shadows that danced like mocking figures. Leo stirred in his sleep, whimpering softly, and my heart twisted with guilt. I had dragged him into this mess, exposed him to the ugliness of my family's dysfunction. Was I a terrible mother? Was I failing him? The questions swirled in my mind, feeding my self-doubt and despair. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, contorted with anger and hatred. I heard my grandmother's voice, cold and calculating, whispering insidious lies. I felt the weight of their betrayal, crushing me beneath its unbearable burden. I was lost, adrift in a sea of darkness, with no land in sight. I remember staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, at the hollow-eyed stranger staring back. My face was gaunt, my hair dull and lifeless, my skin pale and translucent. I looked like a ghost, a shadow of my former self. Was this who I had become? A broken, defeated woman, stripped of her dignity and her hope? A sob escaped my lips, a raw, primal sound that echoed in the sterile silence of the motel room. I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands, and wept. I wept for my lost childhood, for my shattered dreams, for the innocence that had been stolen from me. I wept for Leo, for the future that had been jeopardized by my family's greed and malice. Then something shifted. In the depths of my despair, a tiny spark of defiance flickered to life. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A refusal to surrender, a determination to fight back, to reclaim my life and protect my son. I thought of Leo's face, his bright, innocent eyes, his unwavering trust in me. I couldn't give up on him. I wouldn't let my family's wickedness destroy his future. I stood up, my legs trembling, and looked at myself in the mirror again. The hollow-eyed stranger was still there, but there was something different in her gaze, a flicker of resolve, a spark of steel. I wiped away my tears, took a deep breath, and straightened my shoulders. I wouldn't let them break me. I would use their cruelty as fuel, their lies as a weapon. I would become the storm they never saw coming. I started small. Every day I forced myself to get out of bed, to shower, to dress, to put on a brave face for Leo. I made sure he ate healthy meals, that he had clean clothes, that he felt loved and safe. I enrolled him in a local daycare program, giving myself a few hours each day to focus on my plan. I spent countless hours researching my family's history, meticulously documenting their lies and deceit. I contacted old friends and acquaintances, gathering information, seeking allies. I learned how to use social media to my advantage, creating anonymous accounts, spreading rumors, planting seeds of doubt. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each small victory, my confidence grew. I was no longer the meek, compliant Amelia they had always known. I was a force to be reckoned with. I spent my nights hunched over my laptop, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, piecing together the puzzle, connecting the dots, uncovering the truth. I discovered hidden bank accounts, secret business deals, and a web of fraudulent activity that stretched back for decades. My family's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble, and I was the one wielding the hammer.
Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. That arrogance, that unwavering belief in their own superiority was their undoing. They had grown complacent, arrogant, convinced that they could get away with anything. They underestimated me, dismissing me as weak and insignificant. They never imagined that I would have the courage to fight back, to expose their lies to the world. They thought they had silenced me, but they had only ignited a fire within me, a burning desire for justice. I was patient. I bided my time, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew that one wrong move could jeopardize everything, so I moved with caution, careful not to reveal my hand too soon. I became a master of disguise, blending into the background, observing their every move, listening to their conversations, learning their secrets. I watched as their carefully constructed world began to unravel, as their lies and deceit began to catch up with them. The tension within the family was palpable, the cracks in their facade widening with each passing day. They started to turn on each other, suspicion and paranoia poisoning their relationships. My mother and grandmother were constantly at each other's throats, their once unbreakable bond shattered by greed and resentment. I watched with a cold satisfaction, knowing that their downfall was imminent. The day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. I smiled. I played their game, but I was recording everything. Every condescending word, every dismissive glance, every veiled threat was meticulously documented. I purchased a small, inconspicuous digital voice recorder and kept it with me at all times, hidden in my purse or pocket. I activated it whenever I was around my mother or grandmother, capturing their conversations, their plans, their admissions of guilt. I knew that their words could be my most powerful weapon, irrefutable evidence of their treachery. The recorder became my constant companion, a silent witness to their wickedness. I also invested in a miniature hidden camera, disguised as a pen. It wasn't high-tech, but it was enough to capture key moments, facial expressions, body language, the subtle cues that revealed their true intentions. I used it sparingly, only when I knew I could get away with it without raising suspicion. I needed to be careful. One slip-up could expose my plan and ruin everything. My biggest challenge was accessing the property records and financial documents I needed to prove my case. I couldn't just walk into the county clerk's office and demand to see everything. That would raise red flags and alert my family to my investigation. I needed a more subtle approach. I remembered an old friend from high school, Sarah, who worked as a paralegal at a local law firm. We hadn't stayed in touch, but I knew she was trustworthy and discreet. I reached out to her, explaining my situation in vague terms, hinting at a family dispute involving inheritance. I didn't reveal the full extent of my plan, but I asked if she could help me access some public records. Sarah was hesitant at first, worried about jeopardizing her job, but when I explained that my family was trying to cheat me out of my rightful inheritance, she agreed to help. She used her access to legal databases and online resources to gather information on my family's property holdings, business dealings, and financial transactions. She worked late nights and weekends, carefully compiling the documents I needed. I knew I was asking a lot of her, but I had no one else to turn to. Sarah's help was invaluable, a lifeline in a sea of despair. As I gathered more evidence, I began to see the full extent of my family's corruption. It wasn't just about the house. It was about a network of illegal activities, shady business dealings, and hidden assets. My mother and grandmother were involved in all sorts of questionable ventures, from tax avoidance to money laundering. They had been living a life of luxury on the backs of others, exploiting loopholes in the system and manipulating people for their own gain. The more I learned, the more determined I became to expose them. I wanted to bring them to justice, to make them pay for their crimes. I consulted with a forensic accountant, explaining my suspicions about my family's financial dealings. He agreed to review the documents I had gathered, looking for any signs of fraud or embezzlement. The accountant spent weeks poring over the records, tracing the flow of money, uncovering hidden transactions.
He found a pattern of suspicious activity, a web of offshore accounts and shell corporations that suggested my family was hiding significant assets. He prepared a detailed report outlining his findings, providing me with the evidence I needed to take my case to the authorities. One evening, while I was working late at the motel, I heard a knock on the door. I peered through the peephole and saw my mother standing there, her face pale and drawn. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to open the door. I knew she was capable of anything, but curiosity got the better of me. I cautiously unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing her to enter. "Amelia," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, bracing myself for another round of accusations and insults. But instead, my mother began to cry. She confessed everything. She admitted that she and my grandmother had been plotting against me for years, that they had manipulated me, lied to me, and stolen my inheritance. She said she was sorry, that she regretted her actions, that she wanted to make amends. I listened in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this a trick? Was she trying to manipulate me again? I couldn't be sure. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice cold and wary.
"Because I can't live with the guilt anymore," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I know what we did was wrong. I want to make things right." She offered to return the house, to give me back my inheritance. She begged me to forgive her. I stared at her, trying to decipher her true intentions. Was this a genuine change of heart, or just another act of deception? I decided to play along. I told her I would consider her offer, that I needed time to think. I knew I couldn't trust her, but I also knew that this could be an opportunity to gather more evidence. I secretly recorded our conversation, capturing her confession, her admissions of guilt, her promises to make amends. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the smoking gun that would seal their fate. I had everything I needed. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The day they tried to break me was the day they signed their own destruction. Their weakness wasn't just arrogance, it was their insatiable greed. They craved wealth and power more than anything, and that hunger made them blind. I discovered they were on the verge of closing a massive real estate deal, a project that would net them millions. But the deal was built on lies, on fraudulent permits and environmental violations that could land them in prison. I had copies of the documents, proof of their crimes, locked away and ready to detonate. This deal wasn't just business, it was their lifeline. Without it, their empire would crumble. I decided to use their greed against them, to lure them into a trap they couldn't escape. I crafted an anonymous email, hinting at my knowledge of their illegal activities, suggesting a meeting where we could discuss the matter. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in money. I wanted something far more valuable, their confession, their public downfall. I set the meeting for a remote location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place where I could control the situation, where I could ensure my safety and expose them without interference. The warehouse was perfect, isolated, dilapidated, and equipped with hidden cameras and microphones that would capture every word, every gesture. I wanted to make sure they incriminated themselves beyond any doubt. I prepped the location meticulously, turning it into a stage for their final act. I knew they would be suspicious, cautious, but their greed would outweigh their fear. They couldn't resist the possibility of silencing me, of protecting their precious deal. I anticipated their every move, planning for every contingency. I hired a security team, off-duty police officers I trusted, to ensure that I was safe and that they couldn't escape once they arrived. I needed to make sure the law was on my side when the hammer dropped. The days leading up to the meeting were agonizing. I barely slept, haunted by nightmares of my family's treachery. I replayed every conversation, every betrayal, every lie in my mind, fueling my anger and determination. I was a coiled spring, wound tight and ready to unleash. I focused on Leo, on his bright smile and unwavering love. He was my reason for doing this, my motivation to fight back. I refused to let my family's wickedness poison his life. He deserved a future free from their influence, a future where he could thrive without fear. I made sure he was safe, secure, and surrounded by love. His happiness was my priority,
my guiding star in the darkness. I knew that what I was about to do was dangerous, risky, but I was prepared to do whatever it took to protect him. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about creating a better future for my son. The day of the meeting arrived, cold and gray. The sky was overcast, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I dressed in dark clothes, blending into the shadows. I felt like a soldier preparing for battle, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove to the warehouse, I rehearsed my plan, visualizing every step, every possible outcome. I knew that one wrong move could jeopardize everything, so I focused on staying calm, collected, and in control. I arrived at the warehouse an hour early, checking the equipment, ensuring that everything was in place. The security team was in position, hidden from view, ready to intervene if necessary. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and walked inside. The warehouse was dark and cavernous, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. The only light came from a few strategically placed spotlights, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls. I stood in the center of the room, waiting, listening to the silence. The tension was palpable, the air crackling with anticipation. Then I heard the sound of approaching cars, the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart leaped into my throat. They were here. My mother and grandmother emerged from their limousine, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the surroundings warily. They were accompanied by 2 bodyguards, burly men with cold, menacing stares. I remained calm, composed, my face betraying nothing. I watched as they approached, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The trap was set. The game was about to begin. This was the exact day they tried to end me. I was ready.
Any sudden movements, and you'll be facing more than just me. I pressed a button on a remote control, and the hidden cameras flickered to life, projecting images onto a large screen behind me. There they were, my mother and grandmother, caught in their own web of deceit. Secret meetings, shady deals, whispered threats, all playing out for the world to see. The real estate scam, the falsified permits, the environmental violations, everything was laid bare. As the images flashed across the screen, I saw the color drain from my mother's face. My grandmother, her eyes wide with disbelief, started to tremble. Their carefully constructed world was collapsing around them. The bodyguards, realizing the gravity of the situation, stood down, their faces etched with concern. I played the recordings, their voices filling the warehouse with their vile pronouncements. Their callous disregard for others, their ruthless pursuit of wealth and power, it was all there, undeniable and damning. The confession my mother had given me at the motel, the one where she admitted to everything, echoed through the space. It was the final nail in their coffin. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother stood frozen, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and despair. My grandmother, her face a mask of shock, began to sob. The bodyguards exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. "You," my mother finally choked out, her voice hoarse. "You betrayed us." I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I had never worn before. "No, Mother," I said. "You betrayed yourselves." I turned to the authorities, who had been listening in on the entire exchange. "They're all yours," I said. The security team moved in, handcuffing my mother, my grandmother, and their bodyguards. As they were led away, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with venom. "You'll regret this, Amelia," she hissed. "You'll pay for what you've done." I just stared back at her, my face expressionless. "No, Mother," I said. "You're the ones who will pay." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The news of my family's exposure spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and social media feeds. Their empire crumbled. The real estate deal fell apart, their assets were seized, and they faced a litany of charges, from fraud and embezzlement to tax avoidance and environmental violations. My mother and grandmother, once untouchable, were now pariahs, shunned by society and facing the prospect of years behind bars. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The revenge I had sought for so long had finally been achieved, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I had expected. It was just over.
Leo, shielded from the worst of it, remained my focus. He was safe, happy, and thriving, oblivious to the chaos that had consumed my family. That was all that mattered. I had protected him, secured his future, and that was enough.
The legal proceedings dragged on for months, but the evidence was overwhelming. My mother and grandmother were found guilty on all counts and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Their world, the world they had so ruthlessly constructed, was gone. They lost everything. Their wealth, their power, their reputation, all vanished in an instant. I attended the sentencing hearing, watching as they were led away in handcuffs. As they passed me, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Remorse? I couldn't tell. I just smiled. A small, quiet smile of grim satisfaction. In the aftermath, I sold the family estate, donating the proceeds to charities that supported victims of fraud and abuse. I wanted to use their ill-gotten gains to make a positive impact on the world, to help those who had been hurt by people like them. I started a new life, far away from the shadow of my family. I focused on Leo, on his future, on creating a life filled with love, laughter, and happiness. I found peace and simplicity in the quiet moments spent with my son, in the knowledge that I had done the right thing. I broke the cycle of abuse and corruption that had plagued my family for generations. I stood up for myself, for Leo, and for everyone who had been hurt by their greed and wickedness. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.